Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As we welcome you once again to Wednesday nights with myself, Inayat Wadi, in conversation right here on Assalam Media. And always good having our listeners, our viewers on the various platforms, Salam Media. And tonight promises to be a very, very interesting discussion, considering what has been taking place in the last few weeks. We know the genocide in Gaza still continues unabated. It's still continuous. It's still relentless. And every day without fail, we see people being killed as this genocide continues to unfold. But also another dynamic that has been playing out has been this spat between Iran and Israel after the attack by Israel on Iran. And we know what has actually happened. And for the time being, there has been a ceasefire. But there are still many, many questions that are being raised. And in particular, looking at where we are, looking at how the ceasefire has actually come about and what does this actually mean for the greater Middle East. And this is what we are discussing tonight here with my guest tonight from the Electronic Intifada. We've got Ali Abunimah and we've got Jeff Mackler, US-based anti-war activist. And as we await our guests on screen, I see Ali's up already. Ali, assalamu alaikum and welcome to you.
Alaikum assalam, and thank you and greetings to all your viewers.
Yes, and Jeff, greetings to you as well, and we thank you for your time.
We're honored to be here.
Jeff, are you able to hear me?
Yes.
I think Jeff is having a bit of a problem. But Ali, let's just continue while we are waiting for Jeff. Just looking at where we are at this point in time and looking at the developments of the last few weeks, clearly it has obviously thrown the Middle East into quite a dilemma. And I'm not too sure whether we expected Israel to attack Iran, and we've seen the consequences, what has happened in Tel Aviv. We've seen what has happened in many of the Israeli cities as well. And I'm not too sure whether this was expected, Ali.
Israel has been threatening to attack Iran for decades, so in that sense it was not unexpected, but certainly it was a surprise attack, and it was a surprise attack which happened apparently with the knowledge of the United States while the United States was engaged in negotiations with Iran, which just shows what bad faith those negotiations were in. But Israel attacked Iran. It was a full-scale attack, a war of aggression, a major violation of the UN Charter. But it ended in a defeat for Israel and a victory for Iran. And that, to me, is very clear because Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu claimed in his public statements that the war aimed to remove two existential threats to Israel, the nuclear threat and the ballistic missile threat. And I think the third goal, and probably his most important one, was regime change to cause the collapse of the Islamic Republic of Iran, primarily because it supports Palestinian resistance and Lebanese resistance. And following the ceasefire, Netanyahu claimed a historic victory, and he claimed he'd eliminated these two threats he'd named, nuclear weapons, he actually used the word weapons, and the threat from 20,000 ballistic missiles. And it's very clear that he failed on every front. Iran moved all its enriched uranium out of the sites that the United States bombed. The U.S. intelligence assessment that came out just today says that at most the U.S. and Israeli bombing of Iran set Iran's nuclear program, which is a peaceful program, back by mere months, just a matter of months, all that hullabaloo, and they're saying now that they set it back by months. Netanyahu didn't save Israel from nuclear weapons because Iran had no nuclear weapons, again, according to U.S. intelligence assessments and the International Atomic Energy Agency, and had no intention of producing nuclear weapons. And as for the missiles, Netanyahu's absurd claims, well, I think the clearest evidence of Israeli failure came on Tuesday morning in the hours before the ceasefire, when Israel fired repeated salvos of ballistic missiles at Israel, hammering the country from north to south, keeping millions of Israelis in shelters where they'd spent much of the previous 11 days. And I think that at the end of the war, Israel ended up much weaker. Its missile defenses were exhausted. Iran proved that it could breach them and hit many strategic sites across Israel, much of which we don't know the details of because of the strict censorship in Israel. And the Iranian government, the people actually rallied around it, and it's stronger now. So Israel failed on every front. It was defeated in this war that it started. And the U.S., they dropped their bombs in what Scott Ritter, the former UN weapons inspector, called an act of political theater, and then they said, we've had enough. In other words, Israel also failed to draw the United States into a prolonged regime change war against Iran. So really a total defeat for Israel, and Israel is much weaker. And now I think we'll see the effects of that in the medium and long term, with capital flight and brain drain, as people realize that this violent, racist, genocidal settler colony is nowhere to live.
Hey, Jeff, just to continue, and if you could unmute your mic, please, Jeff. What we've seen also, Jeff, is Israel in particular has been trading blood in the Middle East, supported by the United States of America, supported by many of the Western countries. And what this has actually led to, and what we've learned now from the latest Iranian experience, is the U.S. Being a rogue superpower, despite Donald Trump, and whether we believe him or not. But Trump called it a spectacular success as well. But also at the same time, looking at the United States of America and its role in as far as Israel is concerned, but also as far as the greater Middle East. And this obviously would have had the potential of throwing the Middle East into disarray like we wouldn't have believed. Your mic is muted, Jeff. If you could unmute, please.
How's this? Better?
Much better.
Okay. Well, first, I'm honored to be on your show and to be with Ali Abunimah. But you should know that 99% of what Ali Abunimah said his few minutes has been banned from the American media. There isn't a major newspaper in the country that reported anything about what he said. In fact, the major newspapers, starting out with the U.S. bombing, said that the United States had obliterated the nuclear weapons program. Of course, there is no nuclear weapons program. They said that it had obliterated 3 nuclear weapon sites. There are no nuclear weapon sites. It said that they had no resistance whatsoever, that the Iranian people basically supported the United States, that both parties in the United States, Democrats and Republicans, supported the Trump administration. And they went so far as to broadcast President Trump speaking to the nation using outright profanities, criticizing this group or that group. Not a day passed when another lie was not put forward by the corporate media. So that's the tragedy we're facing. As far as the anti-war movement is concerned, I represent the United National Anti-War Coalition, UNAC. We participated actively and helped build a demonstration against the mass arrest of immigrants in the United States 2 weeks ago. That demonstration on June 14th, I believe, was perhaps, if not the largest demonstration in the history of the world. The estimate was between 5 and 7 million people came out to defend immigrant rights. The same American people that support the right of self-determination, the right of freedom of its own people, in my view, oppose the war in Iran today by the United States. So you just don't hear any of that. You hear the monster war maker daily getting on and off airplanes, gallivanting around the world, proclaiming U.S. power. To start with, Abunimah's fundamental comment that the United States has no legal right to bomb anyone. If there is any genocide, it's done on the part of the United States, who has already slaughtered in Palestine 55,000 people. Ralph Nader put the figure at 100,000 people. Of course, none of the media bothers to mention the fact that in 1953, the United States overthrew the democratically elected government of Iran. And then some 20 years later, in 1979, 25 years later, the United States combined with Saddam Hussein to make war on Iran once again, this time killing some 2 million people, Iranians and Iraqis, in a mass slaughter. The Iranians responded to the U.S. coup in 1979 by organizing the largest demonstration in the history of the world. The 1979 Iranian Revolution, which the corporate media of the United States doesn't mention, mobilized 7 million Iranians. The army, the strongest in the world, or the fifth strongest in the world, literally disintegrated. It turned over its weapons to the Iranian people, the new government. So the history of U.S. war and genocide in Iran goes back to 1953, if not earlier. So today what we are seeing is the United States' effort to continue its domination of the world, which it does, physically speaking. The fact that tiny Iran, in comparison, could defend itself against the world's greatest superpower. Iran has no military bases anywhere in the world. The United States has 1,100 military bases in 100 countries. It is in a state of constant war everywhere in the world. Genocide is the norm for the United States, something the American people don't know. We're trying to change that formula. On June 28th, we've called for nationwide and international protests demanding that the United States stop its war, bring its troops home, stop the genocide, support the right of poor and oppressed people to self-determination, stop the genocidal slaughter of the Palestinian people, stop the mass deportation of the Latino population of the United States, stop the mass deportations, stop the denial of democratic rights and civil liberties. So we are at work trying to mobilize the American people to defend fundamental democratic rights against a right-wing fascist-like government of the United States that is relatively unprecedented.
Ali, just to look at Gaza in particular. Now, we know while the last 2 weeks, what has been playing out between Iran and Israel, all talks of a ceasefire or ceasefire negotiations have actually taken a backseat. And we've still seen the slaughter, we've seen this barbaric murder spree still continue in Gaza and in Palestine. And what has been making headlines is the rhetoric that is being repeated, the anti-Americanism or the anti-Israelism rhetoric that has been repeated over and over again. We've seen Donald Trump being caught up in this bombastic rhetoric as well. And again, listening to what Netanyahu has been telling him. And again, when one puts this into perspective, is this about US foreign policy, or what damage has Netanyahu done in dictating to the United States of America? If you could unmute your mic, please, Ali.
Yeah, you're right to point to Gaza, because that should be our first and foremost concern. During this 12-day Israeli war against Iran, Israel killed almost 900 Palestinians in Gaza, so close to 100 Palestinians a day. That's a Sharpeville massacre every day, and it's been going on for 20 months now. We're getting close to 2 years of a daily Sharpeville massacre in Gaza, a population of 2 million people, while the people are being starved. And I think one of the reasons that Iran was keen to seek a ceasefire, I mean, they didn't ask for it, but they accepted it, is because they don't want the focus to be taken off of Gaza. Iran has never had the strategy of direct confrontation with Israel to liberate Palestine, because that would invite the US deeper into the war. Probably would see a US strategic bombing campaign if the US felt that Israel was going to lose the war, which I think would have been likely given the failure of its missile defenses. So we have to refocus attention on Gaza. The Prime Minister of Qatar yesterday, Qatar has been one of the so-called mediators, said that Gaza ceasefire talks would resume in the coming days. I hope that's the case, and I hope they reach a quick result, because the horror, the bloodshed can't continue. But I want to point to one important thing. On Tuesday, so that's yesterday, the morning the ceasefire was announced, after the ceasefire came into effect, there was this one missile that was launched towards Israel, which Israel claimed came from Iran. Iran denied it, but Israel said, we're blaming Iran and we're going to launch retaliatory air attacks on Tehran. And they actually launched the Israeli fighter jets and sent them towards Tehran to bomb Iran after the ceasefire had come into effect. And I think people have seen, and Jeff mentioned the very profane comments by President Trump. But what did he do? He ordered the Israeli Prime Minister to turn the planes around. He said, turn the planes around, do not drop those bombs. And you know what? That's exactly what Israel did, isn't it? So what does that tell us? It confirms what we've been saying from the very beginning. The moment the United States decides to end this genocide in Gaza, that's when it will stop. Joe Biden could have ordered it to end, and Donald Trump can do the same. But so far, he has refused to do that. Perhaps having seen what trouble the United States could have gotten in, a prolonged and losing war against Iran. It would have been a devastating war for Iran, but it also would have been a disaster for the United States. Perhaps he'll understand that allowing Israel to continue this genocide with US weapons and support will also be a disaster for the United States and for the world. But first and foremost, it is a moral crime. It is the Holocaust of our time, and all of us individually and as communities need to be shouting from the rooftops all day long to stop this genocide and to press our governments to do everything they can. They have obligations under the Genocide Convention. It's not voluntary. When you ratify the Genocide Convention, it is compulsory. You undertake to do everything possible to prevent and punish genocide. South Africa has done more than most by bringing the case in the International Court of Justice, but I think every country could be doing more. I would like to see South Africa rallying the entire African continent given South Africa's leadership role there, to impose sanctions on Israel, to expel its embassies, to really take strong action, because what Israel is doing is not just a moral crime to the Palestinian people, but it is absolutely destroying any sense of international law and world order, and that is a mortal threat to everyone on this planet.
Yes, Ali, I know you've got to leave us in a few minutes, and I just need your thoughts on Israel and assuming the role as a rogue, a superpower in the region. And what damage has this actually done to Israel? And also at the same time, looking at the hypocrisy, obviously, of the United States of America that has been exposed, but also looking at the regional implications in the rest of the Arab world. We know what has happened throughout this genocide in those last 20 months, where Israel has spent the last 2 years or so getting rid of Iran's proxies, which is called the axis of resistance in the Middle East, and then they had a go at Iran. But what damage has this actually done to Israel? Reputational damage, but also at the same time crying out to the United States of America for help. And this is when Trump sent in his B-2 bombers. And after that, obviously, we know that all hell was about to break loose. And as a result, the ceasefire.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing, just a sort of a terminology point, Iran doesn't have proxies. The Palestinian resistance is not a proxy of Iran. It doesn't take orders from Iran. The resistance in Lebanon is not a proxy of Iran. They don't take orders from Iran. And the same is true with Yemen and the resistance in Iraq. Iran supports them and their allies, but Iran doesn't give orders or operate them like puppets. That's sort of an Israeli and American talking point. And I think it's important to say that, because remember, in South Africa during the anti-apartheid struggle, the apartheid regime and the Western governments that supported it used to claim that the ANC was a puppet of the Soviet Union. So it's the same type of rhetoric to erase the fact that there are people in all these countries struggling for their liberation, and Iran supports them. And every Palestinian would tell you, we would welcome support from all countries. It's not just that we only, Palestinians are not saying we only want support from Iran, as the resistance movements in Palestine are not saying we'll only take support from Iran. We're saying we'll take support from any country that will support us. Iran is the only one that has provided that kind of support. But your question is about the impact on Israel. I think that this entire genocide that Israel launched has exposed how weak it is, that Israel only exists in our region because of support from the West, particularly the United States. Israel would not have been able to perpetrate this genocide or carry out these wars of aggression against Lebanon, against Syria, against Yemen, against the Palestinians, and now against Iran, without a 24/7 airlift of American weapons, without German weapons, without French weapons, without British weapons, without the support from all of these unreformed colonial countries, these genocidal countries. And Israel, it can't even defend itself without the United States. The United States has had to send anti-ballistic missile destroyers and the THAAD anti-ballistic missile system to Israel, and even that failed to stop the Iranian missiles from getting through Israel's missile shield. And I think Israel's pitch to many of the Arab countries, the US-backed Gulf regimes and others, was, you should ally with us because we are strong and we will protect you from an Iranian threat, a supposed Iranian threat. I don't think Iran has ever been a threat to any of the Arab countries. But what does that offer look like now when people see how weak Israel is, that it can't even defend itself, and that Iran is actually strong and resilient and was able by itself to stand up to this massive assault backed by the United States and the entire Western world. And I think from the perspective of the settler population in Israel, and by that I mean the entire Israeli Jewish population, because they're a settler colonial population, whether they live in the West Bank and Gaza or Tel Aviv, they live on the ruins of Palestinian communities. Israel looks like a much less attractive proposition, because the proposition of all these settler colonies is that we Europeans or we Americans can go to Palestine or to Africa and we can have a wonderful first world lifestyle while our army butchers the natives, and we don't face any consequences from that. We continue having our cocktails and being on the beach and everything is fine for us. That's how it was in apartheid South Africa. While the black population and other populations lived a life of utter horror. That's the deal with settler colonies. But when that deal no longer holds, and when Israelis see that far from being a safe haven for Jews, Israel is the most dangerous place in the world for Jews because of the behavior of the Zionist regime, well, they will start running for the exit. And that was already happening prior to October 2023, but it's accelerated since October 2023. And everyone who can is getting out. If you're an Israeli and you have a second passport, or you are highly educated and you can get a job at a tech company in Australia or Canada or the United States or Germany, you will go, and many are going. And it's very notable that during the war with Iran, Israel banned Israelis from leaving the country. For the first couple of days, they stopped all flights in and out of the country. Then they restarted flights by the national airline El Al, but they said that those flights are not allowed to take Israelis out of the country. They're only allowed to bring Israelis back from abroad. Imagine that the country that claims to be the safe haven for Jews says that Jews cannot escape from, bombardment by missiles. They have to stay there as human shields, and they're not allowed to travel outside the country to safety. So all of this exposed the myth of Israel and let the world see the reality. So I think this war, this gamble by Netanyahu, which was supposed to show Israel's strength, really showed its weakness and accelerated its decline. I don't think this settler colony has a future in Palestine and the Middle East. And I think it hastened its own decline, and we will see it come to an end as we saw apartheid South Africa come to an end. That doesn't mean that every Israeli Jew will leave Palestine. Just like South Africa, those who wish to stay and live as equal citizens in the future, not as colonial masters and as a master race, they will stay. And Palestinians have never had a problem with Jews as Jews. It's never been about that. That's another one of the lies, that the hostility of Palestinians towards Israel is because of anti-Semitism. That's always been one of the colonial lies used to spear Palestinians. But I think as a political entity, as a genocidal Zionist entity, Israel is hastening towards its end. And I think it's the job of all decent and peace-loving people to help bring this political monster to an end, just like people all over the world help the people of South Africa free themselves from the monster of apartheid and white supremacy.
Ali, just very quickly, what message has Iran sent to the rest of the Arab world? Because we know there has been this devastating stalemate over what to do about Gaza, about those that have normalized relationships with Israel, those that even provided air cover to Israel, even now with the war with Iran. And while all of this was playing out, we've seen thousands of activists converging into Cairo, the march to Rafah. All of that was taking place while this war was taking place, and the actions of the Egyptian government, the Jordanian government has been indicated. So what message is Israel actually sending to the Arab world? Because it came to a point where Israel had actually threatened to send their missiles to the American that are spread all over the Middle East.
Yeah, the message Iran sent by standing up to this aggression alone is that surrender and capitulation is not the only choice, that a country can defend itself, can stand up for its sovereignty, its independence, and its dignity. And it can work, I mean, that there are alternatives to capitulation to Israel and the United States. Iran has very strong relationships with Russia, with China, with other countries in the global south, and those relationships are growing. And that's what the other countries, the Arab countries, should be seeking. They should be seeking sovereignty, independence, and cooperation with the majority in the world, not simply licking the boots of the American colonial masters. I think the people are there across the Arab world. They don't want their countries and their governments to be slaves of the United States and Israel. But unfortunately, the United States has always opposed democracy in this region, and whenever democracy, the sparks of democracy have started to glow, the U.S. has snuffed it out in order to maintain these despotic regimes over the people here. But the message, I think, is that we can't continue in a world. I mean, there's no natural hostility towards the United States in the Arab world or in Iran or among Muslims. I think people would love to have good relationships with the United States, but to have relationships with the United States as a distant country, minding its own business, engaging in trade and culture, in all sorts of normal exchanges, and not as an imperial master sending its aircraft carriers and its cruise missiles and its B-2 bombers to bomb everyone into submission. That world should have been left behind in the 19th century.
Well, Ali, shukran for that, and I know you've got to leave us, but we do appreciate you taking time out for us this evening, and all the best to you, and hoping to engage with you sometime in the future. But please take care. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam. It will be my pleasure. Thank you.
Yes. Jeff, let's continue with you. And obviously, you've heard so much that Ali has actually said. And let's just look at it from the United States perspective as well, where we've seen, Donald Trump very, very unpredictable, even in the build-up to Israel striking Iran again. But again, making statements like Israel's fight is America's strike, and getting caught up, and I mentioned this earlier to Ali, in bombastic rhetoric. And is he being dictated by what Benjamin Netanyahu is telling him, or is Trump a man with his own mind?
There is a big truth that the American media daily ignores. And that is that the Zionist colonial apartheid racist state of Israel is at constant war in the Middle East, daily. So far in this discussion, I neglected to mention that the United States dropped at least a dozen bunker buster bombs, 30,000-pound bombs, where only the United States has a plane capable of carrying them, on Iran in just a few days. In fact, in one day. These bombs are the largest non-nuclear weapons in the world. And they were deployed with the promise that they would obliterate Iran's non-existent nuclear weapons program. Just today, major corporate media like the New York Times reported that there was no such obliteration, that the largest bombs in the world, a dozen of them at least, dropped on Iran had little or no effect. At best, according to U.S. scientists setting back Iran's non-existent nuclear weapons program by 3 months. United States daily slaughters Iranian scientists, Iranian military leaders, Iranian civilians, in the same way that the Biden administration practiced genocide against the Palestinians. Ralph Nader puts the figure at 100,000, a majority children and women, slaughtered by U.S. weapons. The official, quote, figures are 55,000 Palestinians. The Palestinians committed the crime of defending their right to self-determination, of defending their right to live in the homeland where they lived for 2,000 years, of opposing the Zionist colonization and destruction of the Palestinian nation. When the Palestinians from their concentration camps in Gaza fought back, the United States declared them terrorists, but with no mention of the fact that the United States has supported the Zionist colonization of Israel since 1948. The Palestinian people, in their vast majority, oppose being yet another colony of the United States. So if you live in the United States, you don't stand a chance, listening to the corporate media, of having any idea what's happening in the world. The Trump administration, which daily commits mass murder literally everywhere in the world, 1,100 military bases in 100 countries, with U.S. occupying forces with more troops than the rest of the world combined, which has a virtual monopoly on nuclear weapons, cannot claim the role of peacemaker when Trump argues that the United States is declaring a ceasefire. What could any government do in the face of the overwhelming superiority militarily? If the Iranians even tried to have a serious military response, their nation would be obliterated, exactly like every other nation that fights back would be. The Iranians did fight back, but they notified the United States that they were going to send a slew of missiles, so the United States could take all defensive measures to shoot them all down. It maintained the moral high ground, but it did not offer anything resembling, in my opinion, a military defense. And that's because they're incapable of doing that, literally incapable. If you talk about Iran's military capabilities, it's non-existent in comparison to the United States. You have to understand, when the United States launches bunker buster bombs in violation of 1 million international laws, with condemnation from everywhere in the world, we cannot give any credibility to this. The United States has no right to impose regime change on any nation. It tried to. Twice it imposed its own dictators. The United States trained the notorious Savak in Iran, which had 60,000 U.S. trained agents that had the largest number in 1953. Political prisoners in the entire world, if not in the entire world combined. It overthrew a democratically elected government of Mohammad Mossadegh that never harmed anyone in the world. And then it did the same thing 25 years later in the Iran-Iraq War. The United States literally organized a 10-year war, 9-year war that slaughtered 1 million Iranians and 800,000 Iraqis in order to control Iran's oil. War and oil and profit are the norm for the United States. There is no justification, unless they invent one, like the Iranians are threatening war against the United States. Every international agency, including U.S. government agencies, have rejected the idea, the notion, factually, that the Iranians are preparing nuclear weapons. But they need that pretext in order to control the world's oil supply, in order to deny the Iranian people the right to produce their own oil, to ship their own oil. It's the same thing, if you'll forgive me for digressing, against the war in Ukraine. The Zionist United States orchestrated the war in Ukraine by literally overthrowing the democratically elected government of Ukraine in order to accomplish one purpose, and that is to stop Ukraine from to allow Ukraine to invade the United States, to invade in order to sequester Ukrainian oil, the majority of which was under the control of Russia with the agreement of the Ukrainian government. The entire war in Ukraine was a maneuver to replace Russian control of Ukraine, which it had been for hundreds of years, with American control in order to steal the oil. That was the purpose of the 53 war, regime change, and the mass slaughter in 1979, opposed by the entire world. So war is the middle name of American corporations. It conducts it to advance the interests of the tiny elite in the United States and not the American people. Not to mention the fact that the use of fossil fuel poses a deadly threat to the environment of the entire world, and yet the Trump administration is continuing the use of deadly fossil fuel, which is the main contributor to global warming. United States is
Well,
United States has,
essentially, Jeff, what we're saying here now is, Trump has been pleasing the neocons, the warmongers, the military-industrial complex, and yet with the ceasefire, I've read about reports about Trump seeking the Nobel Peace Prize. Donald Trump has actually saved the world. He came on a ticket, on an election ticket of make America great again. Now we're hearing about making Iran great again as well. How has this actually gone down in the United States of America? Because we are led to believe that Americans have been very, very disunited, particularly with regard to Israel and the support that America is giving Israel, and also the unilateral action that Donald Trump has taken without congressional approval in sending, those B-2 bombers and getting directly involved with the war against Iran.
it's interesting that every single poll outside of Israel shows the American people are opposed to the genocide in Gaza, and yet the genocide continues. Every opinion poll, with regard to a corporate media totally controlled by the ruling rich, opposes the war of the ruling rich on the Palestinian people. And every single poll shows that they are opposed to the deportation of American Latinos. And yet the deportations continue. The United States doesn't, the government, corporate government, doesn't give a hoot for the opinion of the American people. That's why I reported earlier that we organized in coalition with hundreds of American organizations on June 14th, the largest protest virtually in the history of the world. And yet the warmongers continued and started yet another war in order to distract attention of the American people from the genocide in Gaza to yet another demonization of a poor and oppressed people. Our job in the United States is to mobilize mass support. Mass mobilizations are the only effective tool that we have, trying to win the American people and the world's people against perpetual war. Trump claims that he is a man of peace, and he has slashed social budgets in every front except one, and that is he has significantly increased the amount of money spent on the U.S. military, which exceeds the total military expenditures of the entire world combined. That's because war is profitable for the ruling rich. Oil is profitable for the ruling rich. Mass destruction is profitable, and it's justified by a monopoly-controlled corporate media run by a tiny handful of people. And if anyone, including the world's richest man, Elon Musk, stands in the way, they're ousted in 2 seconds. Elon Musk was given the right to run the country until he stepped on a few ruling rich toes and he was disappeared. It's difficult to understand for the people of the world how powerful the U.S. ruling rich is. They control the corporations, they control the military industrial complex, they control the media, they control the fossil fuel production, and they control the repressive apparatus of the government and the police. The United States violated its own constitution last week when it sent the Marines and the National Guard to put down so-called domestic uprisings, which threatened, according to Trump, the national security interests of the United States. Can you imagine that? Latinos opposing the breaking down of their own doors and the mass arrest by Marines and the National Guard, which is their constitutional right to exist. They oppose the mass deportation of an oppressed people in the United States, not to mention their murder, their bombing, their breaking in of their houses, the violation of American laws, all with a corporate manufactured media campaign, one day stating that the Latinos threatened the national security interests of the United States. And literally a day later, Trump called it off and said they really don't threaten anyone. And that's because the mass arrests were aimed at the poorest of the poor in the United States. It's the poor Latinos whose countries have been in Central America and Latin America obliterated by U.S. sanctions and physical attacks and interventions. They produce the majority of the wealth in agribusiness. They do the service industries. They do all the jobs that poor people don't do, that poor people are assigned to do. When the United States allowed China to enter the World Trade Organization, it was a forced agreement on China that they would allow Americans to ship U.S. jobs to Chinese factories that hire teenage dormitory factories that hire teenage women working 80 hours a week at 6 cents an hour. And that is allowing China to produce almost free labor for American corporations to deindustrialize the United States and shipping jobs of union members to the poorest countries in the world, Indonesia, South Africa. Why pay an American a union wage when you can have a Chinese for 6 cents an hour? Now that wage is up to $1 an hour or $1.50, as opposed to union wages where you can live a decent life at $20, $30, or $40 an hour. This is all the plan of U.S. corporate America. And of course, it includes, it's necessitated the demonization of Latinos. One day, a threat to the national security of the United States, and literally the president called off the threat, praising Latinos. A week later, saying we really need them and we're not going to deport them anymore, we're not going to violate the Constitution. This is the bipartisan party of both the Democrats and the Republicans. There are no exceptions.
Yes, Jeff. And just finally, Jeff, I spoke early on about Israel being a rogue superpower or assuming the role of a rogue superpower in the Middle East. And the United States obviously assuming this superpower or rogue superpower right across the entire world. But it is clear that America cannot go it alone. Early on, Ali Abunimah spoke about the end game for Israel, where, especially now after this war with Iran, it's been heavily exposed. To what extent globally is the United States of America exposed? And when one looks at it in relation to countries like Russia, China, and also even when one looks at Western Europe, when one looks at NATO, because previously NATO's response was an attack to one is an attack to all or attack on all. And we've seen in the past the United States of America, past governments also seeking allies from Western Europe.
Well, in truth, the United States understands that the United States government is hated across the world. They have put enormous pressure on every Middle Eastern country to bend to the will of the United States or be punished, be economically isolated, be subject to U.S. weapons of mass destruction. So countries like Egypt today function as the tool of the Zionist regime. In fact, most of the Arab countries, whose leaders are the ones that control the oil wealth of the country, are subordinate to the U.S. economic, oil, military interests of American imperialism. The only hope, in my view, to change that equation, not counting the occasional statements of the Arab regimes attacking United States policy in the Middle East, the only hope is mass mobilization. That's the only fear that the United States has, that the people of the world reject collectively. That's what happened on June 14th, when millions around the globe put a bit of fear in the United States and said, you cannot bomb the world, not to mention our own countries. So we have a big job ahead of us. Rhetoric about the progressive nature of the Arab regimes, whose leaders, corporate leaders, are dependent on finances from the United States, on sale of oil to the United States, on processing oil and selling it at profits around the world. Those countries are not going to help. Increasingly, year after year, they have become the pawns of American imperialism. The South African people liberated themselves because they had basically a revolution, a partial revolution, that ended the total control of the United States over South Africa's economy. Tragically, today, the Trump administration invented the notion that it had to import to the United States white South Africans who are being persecuted by the current Black South African government. What a farce. A handful of exploiters, of mass murderers, of genocidal, perpetrators are today brought into the United States as victims of Black hatred in South Africa. Trump is bringing them to the United States with all kinds of privileges, whereas the South African population continues to live at poverty levels despite their liberation. And that's only because South Africa's liberation was not accompanied by equal rights in the economic field. The military, political, economic nature of South Africa remains similar to what it was under apartheid. That's a terrible tragedy of our time. The South African people have a big job ahead of them, and it's the same job that the United States has and the Palestinian people. It's very hard for me to describe the horror imposed on poor people around the world by American imperialism. But the statistics demonstrate the truth of that assertion. Every poll in the world outside of Israel shows the people of the world are opposed to genocide, and yet it continues. The solution, in my opinion, is the mobilization of the mass of working people, of poor people, of oppressed people, of colonized people everywhere, the withdrawal of all U.S. troops from everywhere in the world, the banning of all nuclear weapons, beginning with the United States and Israel. That's the starting point. The United States has more nuclear weapons, probably 100 times more than the entire world combined, and it's the only nation to ever use them, and to use almost the equivalent of atomic bombs on Iran in the last week.
Well, very, very scary indeed, Jeff. But yes, as you mentioned, that it requires mobilization right across the entire world. And we knew at some point in time that, Gaza and the genocide in Gaza would define and determine a new world order. Hopefully, we are seeing this right across the entire world. We've seen that mobilization on the streets of almost every major city right across the entire world. And, hopefully, at some point in time, we pray and hope that this will bear the fruits and the desired outcome for a better world, for peace in the world as well, and also for justice to prevail. And particularly when we're talking about justice, justice for the people of Palestine. And as I mentioned right at the outset to Ali as well, while all of this is playing out, Gazans, Palestinians are being slaughtered on a daily basis. And there is absolutely no end to this. There is no talk of a concrete plan of action as far as the ceasefire is concerned. And once again, this rogue state of Israel under Benjamin Netanyahu continues unchecked and acting with impunity.
I have to say, for your listeners and observers, that on June 14th, we had 5,100 demonstrations in 50 states opposed to the deportation of the Latino population, the violation of the U.S. Constitution, and the mobilization of U.S. troops to openly beat and imprison thousands, tens of thousands of people who don't speak English in the United States, of refugees from U.S. horror imposed on Latin American countries around the world. So there is hope for the American people. 5,100 demonstrations in all 50 states was a good starting point. The demonstrations were not totally independent. Some of them, wings of the American ruling rich, joined in order to score a few points against the monster Donald Trump. But the ruling rich were very nervous about mass mobilizations. They opposed those mobilizations during the Vietnam War. It's a war that you don't talk about very much. But did you know, for example, that the war in Vietnam, which we organized, that is the anti-war movement, massive demonstrations on a scale never be seen in history. Vietnam War took the lives of 4 million Vietnamese and people in the region. It was a genocidal war of untold proportions, and it went on for 10 years, and it was a bipartisan war. It was a war for profit, and the Vietnamese people paid a magnificent, waged a magnificent battle to keep the imperialist beast out of their country. The same thing more recently with the people of Afghanistan and Iraq, who mobilized to keep the United States, to push the United States imperialist troops out of their country. The United States did drop bunker buster bombs on the Afghanis, claiming that they were terrorists, that they had no right to control their own country, that they had no right to defend themselves. That's the justification for keeping U.S. troops everywhere. It's profitable. It helps U.S. control the resources of the world, not only the oil, but rare earth metals, and other materials that are designed to enrich the U.S. ruling class. All of the ideological reasons, blaming it on the Iranian people, the Palestinian people, poor people, the Latino people, the poorest in the United States, are all pretext invented to maximize the profits of a handful of the corporate elite. And the United States has, quote, elected in a rigged judicial system a monster like Donald Trump, while the Democrats essentially stand by and vote for or give credence to all of Trump's policies as if there is an element of credibility, as if the United States policy is designed to defend the so-called national security interests of the United States. That's a pretext that the United States used during the McCarthy era. They obliterated civil liberties, imprisoned dissidents, banned free speech on the grounds that communists, so-called communists, would take advantage of it and challenge the national security interests of the United States. The national security of the United States rests in peace, in solidarity, and anti-racism, and struggles against poverty, in union rights, in mobilizing people in peaceful demonstrations to advance their own cause. It has nothing to do with defending the national security interests of the super rich. That's a lying myth that is daily perpetrated on the American people that we must challenge. And I must say, it is wonderful and sad at the same time that I, who have zero access to the American mass media, have to go to the other side of the world to your wonderful radio program to get at least a small part of the truth out to the people of the world. Thank you so much. Salam.
Well, we thank you for that as well, Jeff. We thank you. We do appreciate you taking time out. And I think it's, I don't think you alone in this. We've spoken to many people, many analysts as well, who obviously don't get the time of the day on the mainstream media in the United States of America. And this is why they rely on independent media like ourselves as well. But we certainly are getting the message out, even if it's through a media outlet like ours as well. And we do appreciate you taking time out and spending time with us right here on Salam Media. We wish you all the best, Jeff. And as I always say, we do appreciate you always, never ever refusing us here at Salam Media, and hope you have further engagement. But for now, please be safe and please take care.
Thank you, and you too. My best.
Jeff Mackler, anti-war activist, with us this evening, and yes, Ali Abunimah had to leave a bit earlier as well, but I'm sure at some point in time we will be engaging with him a lot more. But once again, telling a very, very different story compared to what you would want or what you would read or you would watch in mainstream media as well. And we've seen a very different Iran actually emerge out of this attack by Israel. And also we've seen the hypocrisy of the United States of America being exposed, and also looking at whether America and Israel have actually achieved their objectives in attacking Iran in terms of the nuclear sites, whether these objectives were achieved, and also at the same time looking at Donald Trump, although calling it a major victory. At the end of the day, we know that there has been public endorsement of protests against the United States of America. Israel, one of the biggest losers, and this is the promised land. But we've seen this mass exodus of people leaving their promised land, the land that they thought is the promised land, coming to this promised land, and a lot more are expected to go. As Ali Abunimah mentioned earlier on, people were actually prevented from leaving Israel. So how many are going to stay? But also, I think what is absolutely important in the context of this discussion that we're having is to look at the Arab world and the message to the Arab world. And this message is loud and clear. The state of Israel, occupied Palestine, is not what it actually claims to be, because without the United States of America, Israel is absolutely nothing. And this Arab countries, and particularly those who have normalized, who have got very, very close ties with the likes of Israel as well, and also countries like Egypt, where we know there have been calls to break the blockade of Gaza to deliver food, and Egypt impotent, unable to do this. And while everything was playing out, Egypt taking action against the thousands that had converged in Cairo, the march to Rafah that was due to take place, detaining people, withholding their passports, doing all of that. And at the same time, even countries like Jordan that were exposed, opening up their airspace. This sends a very, very powerful message to the Arab world that we know that many of them are so deeply invested in Israeli asset companies, in their management companies, in more ways than one. This obviously sends a very, very strong message that Israel is not who it claims to be. Benjamin Netanyahu at this point in time clinging onto power, and from time to time he requires diversions like Iran, like attacking Iran, to try and win popular support back into his country as well. And we know that much of Israel's society were behind Benjamin Netanyahu throughout this attack on Iran. But again, time will tell, but also more importantly, we trust and hope that truth will prevail, because what we would be interested in seeing is what damage has Iran actually done to Iran. And with that, I'm leaving you for myself and the team. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.